Okay, everyone, welcome to today's show. I'm really excited to bring this gentleman on. As you know, a friend of mine, Carly, who's got a channel called Dark Matters, we share guests, we share subject matter. And Guy did a show with Carly. It was brilliant. It was talking about Tesla, the Cabbage Patch Children, Tartaria, stuff like that. And I thought I have to bring Guy on. So, Guy, how are you doing today, mate?
I'm all right, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm all right. Yeah, we're just talking before we hit record there. It's like yeah, it's a very, very interesting subject matter. Goes into like the false history, leading us all the way from Tartaria to the resets, the mud floods, the cabbage children, the clones, all that kind of stuff. It's quite a juicy subject, right?
Yeah, it's not a rabbit hole, it's a warren. It's an absolute warren.
Brilliant. Yeah, I like that. And I thought it'd be great to bring you on if we could go through a lot of that, starting maybe
Sure.
at the beginning. And like I was asking you just before, maybe you could sort of start off with the part of the chronology that makes the most sense. Maybe right at the beginning, wherever whatever that looks like. And then yeah, we'll just have a conversation down the pub chat as we go along. So yeah,
Yeah, sure. That sounds
yeah,
good to me.
yeah.
So what I can do if it helps is I
Mm.
can sort of tell you how I got into Tartaria and what I uncovered, if
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, let's go with that. Let's start with
kind of
that if that feels good. Yeah. Yeah.
well, it was as we were saying before we came on air that it was Max Egan who you've spoken to that got me involved, and I hadn't heard of Tartaria before. To me, it was the Mongolian Empire, and when he started going on about Tartaria, it was during the pandemic, and I had 9 months with nothing to do, and I've been down the rabbit hole all my life. I joined the Freemasons to find out how they built the pyramids, and didn't,
Mm.
and so left. But I've been looking into human cloning, what's going on in Antarctica, things like that for a very long time. But Max Egan suddenly introduced to me this empire I'd never heard of.
Yeah.
And that then introduced me to the falsification of our timeline, um, key people in history being inverted, where the victors really do write the history. Um, and then this complete deletion of an entire civilization, perhaps 1,000 years, wiped off the face of the earth. And then how that happened, how they did it, who did it, and how they repopulated and reintroduced what ultimately is Atlantean technology back into the system through the Industrial Revolution. So it kind of just researching one thing just exposed that literally everything we've been told, right up until the last news bulletin on TV, is a lie. Absolutely everything is a lie.
Is that what you meant about inverted? You said the key figures are
Yeah,
inverted. Is that what you meant by that? Like the truth has just been
yeah,
turned upside down. Okay, yeah. It's not just the trans
yeah,
inversion stuff.
absolutely.
It's everything. Truth
Oh
itself.
no,
That's
no,
something
I
else.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah, I don't go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't. I have
Uh,
with regard to that, I think that probably ultimately what they're trying to do is dehumanize us,
yeah.
and sort of get us to a point where there is no race, there is no religion, there is no sex.
Mm.
Everybody just is the same. We're kind of homogenized.
Yeah. And
And that, but the inversion of people, I think, has got something to do with Baphomet.
yeah, I think so as well. Some kind of Luciferian reversal. And it's almost like they want to it's like to get us spiritually confused, to kind of worship the feminine as the masculine as the
Yeah,
feminine. It's like a kind of a disorientation in some sense.
yeah. Although I wouldn't say Luciferian. It's interesting because a lot of
Okay.
people would, but
Mm.
having sort of dug into him, I mean, the similarities between Lucifer and Jesus are incredible.
Mm.
They're both referred to as the morning star. And
Yeah.
if you think ultimately what Lucifer did, sharing knowledge that we had a right to know,
Mm.
and he's kicked out of, cast from heaven because he doesn't agree with this tyrant.
Right.
So I don't know if we've been given a little bit of a
Even that
false narrative behind.
even that could be an
Yeah,
inversion somehow. That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I think so. The Second World War is perhaps one of the best examples. You've
Mm.
got people out there that would celebrate and almost idolize people like Winston Churchill, who
Mm.
ultimately were war criminals and committed acts of genocide. If you look at what they did in Dresden, so history is really written by the victors.
Unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. Just going back into the history, you said you went into the Freemasons. Can I just touch upon that
Mm.
just for a short while? So,
Yeah, you
what
can ask
what
me anything about that. People
what?
think I can't
Yeah, no,
talk about it, but
no. So yeah, you can
no,
now.
it
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
like because
Yeah,
there's different views on that. A lot of people just say that it's evil, demonic, and that they're killing babies and sacred rituals and killing animals and stuff. Right?
yeah.
I've heard that. I've actually spoken to some members that say that it does go on, but it only goes on when you get to a certain level. But like, what was your experience like in the Freemasons? And is it just basically just like a club, like a networking club at the entry level of it, or what is it?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, there are different people in amongst these lodges, and they join for very different reasons. And I would say, from my experience, I joined when I was in my early 30s, and I left about 7 years ago.
Hmm.
I was a year away from being what the master of the lodge, which sounds great, but it's not very high ranking at all. So I was a third degree Mason, a master Mason, but there's 30 levels above that. And the people in my lodge, I went to Great Queen Street, which is the Grand Lodge of the United Kingdom. It's the head office, if you like, for Freemasonry. Um, some people joined because they used it to propel their career path, and a lot of them were serving police officers in the Met. And you join, and you could be a detective constable. You get your inspector to come and join the Freemasons, and all of a sudden, this man owes you a favor. So there's a promotion coming along for a sergeant, and of course, they have to do anything they can to support a fellow Freemason, a brother. So some people join for that reason; they use it for their career. But a lot of people that I met joined because they were widowers. They were knocking on in years, and they had a very, very small, almost in some cases non-existent social life, and they wanted to meet new people and get out. And there are a lot of people that join for that reason, to make friends, and open up a new circle. Some people join because they want to do charity work, and some people because they want knowledge. They think that they're going to be given occulted knowledge, which is me. I had nothing to gain by joining. I was a tattoo artist
Oh, right.
before I started writing. I retired about a year ago, so I had nothing to gain. They weren't really my typical client base, So
Yeah.
I wanted to know who built the pyramids, who runs the world, who's in charge, how does the pyramid of power work. I wanted to know more about King Solomon, and I found out bits and pieces. But what I did find out is, even if you get to the highest level, the 33rd degree, there are another 66 dark degrees. That is where the scary stuff happens.
And so you
Mm.
started then. Um, what was the next step for you? You started buying very ancient books, like old books, history books and
Yeah,
stuff. Was that the next stage
yeah.
for you?
It
Yeah.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
We've now got a bit of a library going on here. I mean, there are books piled up everywhere. My latest purchase is the Ethiopian Bible. I wanted to read a Bible that hadn't been bastardized by the royal family,
Yeah.
ultimately. The
Yeah.
King James Bible is missing key information. And I didn't want to go and buy all of this. I've read the Book of Enoch, but
Mm.
I wanted to read it as it was originally written. And I think that's probably the closest
Is it?
there is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because the Book of Enoch and other things. It's got 88, I think 801 books in the Ethiopian Bible, and 88 of them are missing from the King James Bible. So, there's the Book of Giants, there's Jesus's book, the Book of Thomas, and the Book of Enoch's probably the most popular one. But if anybody, you have to decipher it. I mean, I'm not someone that would go to church and pray. And if you read the
Mm.
Bible, it tells you not to do that anyway. It's just something you do in solitude. You don't go to a building, and you certainly don't get someone to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. Um, so if you read the Bible, it actually tells you a lot of information. And I think what I've learned since researching Tartaria for over 5 years now is that there's a lot of mythology that isn't mythology at all. And a lot of what we consider to be fact that actually is fiction. And a classic example of that would be dinosaurs. Now,
I've done a show on
yeah,
that. It didn't never happened. Yeah.
no, they never existed.
No,
What they're
no.
talking about there is the remains
Giants.
of giants
Yeah.
and dragons and minotaurs, griffins and these mythological animals
Yeah.
weren't. And the Smithsonian Institute perhaps are the best in America at
Mm.
disposing of the evidence. And of course, in Europe, the Vatican, their vaults would contain lots of information as well,
Mm.
and remains. So yeah, I mean, the dinosaurs is something that I used to look at the Tyrannosaurus Rex and think that those arms are pointless. Maybe they're on
Yeah.
backwards and they should be wings.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you put them on the back, it starts to make a little bit more sense.
Mm.
It was just
What was the point
sorry,
in that? Sorry to inject. Why do you think they did create that psyop of dinosaurs? Do you know why?
because people were finding remains, so they had to put these together and come up with a backstory. Because if they started saying, "Well, there used to be giants,"
Oh, they
people
were
aren't.
actually giants, were they? They were
Yeah, this
major
huge
giants. Yeah.
femur.
Yeah.
Well, that was a dinosaur, and no, it wasn't. It was someone who was 16 feet
Mm.
tall. Um, and again, the Bible would say, Noah. I mean, some people say he was like 20 feet tall. Some people, wrote that he was even taller than that. So there appears to be something happened in the 1700s to reduce the oxygen level in our atmosphere, and these giant trees were cut down, which played a key part in that. And by reducing the oxygen level in the atmosphere, it stifled the growth of everything from vegetation to animals, and the frequency of 432 hertz that this planet works on was changed. And so everything has struggled, and I would question perhaps wild animals weren't so wild until the frequency was changed. It's affected everything, but the oxygen level stifled the growth. And that's why when I was researching Tartaria, that I had to get old books, and some of them are really hard to find because I had to read it. I didn't want to just watch YouTube and get someone's opinion of something. I had to find this stuff for myself. But the whole planet, whatever you want to call it, is basically a circuit board. It's an electromagnetic grid, and I suppose we would call these ley lines. And things are built specifically where ley lines meet, and they're
Nodes.
built.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what you can do by disrupting that circuit board, you can cause all sorts of damage. So you can cause earthquakes, you can cause tectonic movement, you can even shift the poles. And by doing that, you can also at the same time change the frequency. You can modify the weather, cause tsunamis, and that's what they did. So everything was sort of broken, damaged. They broke this grid, and I think it can be repaired, and I think it can be put right. But we're in this season that people refer to as Satan's little season, where Lucifer's chains are broken, and Lucifer is set free, which is what the Statue of Liberty depicts, and it's holding the Declaration of Independence within Roman numerals 1776. If anyone looks closely, the M's out of alignment because the M was added at a later date. So this is to show that we are in Satan's little season, and this is when the parasites, a particular group of people, are allowed to do whatever they need to do. And that was agreed, apparently, agreed a very, very long time ago, that unless we wanted another great flooded deluge where they'd wipe out humanity, they wanted a period of time after the reign of Tartaria where they could, I suppose, implement nefarious things like, alcohol, drugs, prostitution, and slowly we come into sort of, the trans agenda and poisoning people and war and genocide and so on. And that's the period we're in now, and it should, in theory, come to an end in 2026 next year.
Why do you say that? Why do you say?
Well, because from the research I've done and endless hours I've spent listening to people telling me and explaining it to me, that it appears that Satan's little season is 250 years, and it started in 1776.
Mm-hmm.
So that would bring it up to next year, which is probably, and I don't think it stops dead.
Mm-hmm.
So you could argue the 4th of July next year would be 250 years since the beginning of New World Order, which the American dollar bill, actually illustrates for anybody who wants to double check that. Flip it over. You've got the pyramid, the all-seeing eye, New World Order, 1776. It's there for everyone. And I think Agenda 30 and Agenda 21, like, implementing things like 5G, 15-minute cities, digital ID, and, trying to inject us with things that, are going to cause us some serious damage. I think that is I suppose that.
Last hurrah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
feel
think so.
I feel it's like it's almost like I've given this metaphor before. It's like a cornered rat. It's almost like it knows it has to just have one last
Hmm.
attack, or in the horror movies when you kill the monster, but then it has that one last that go at you.
Yeah,
It's a little bit. I feel as though it could be that they're coming to an end and they know they are, and it's their last
yeah,
attempt to throw everything in the kitchen sink at us to kind of
yeah,
maintain the old what do you say, Satan's little season. It's almost
yeah,
like they know that's running out. It's like they're desperately trying to like batten down the hatches and try and keep it, but they know they can't. Maybe that's the
yeah.
case, right?
I think so, and I think
Yeah.
we've seen a few people go. I mean, we lost a pope recently. I mean, that's not the pope we want to see go. It's the grey pope, Pepe Orsini, that we
Mm,
really do need to see the end of. But
mm.
we saw Jacob Rothschild go. Another one of the Rothschilds out in America was killed in a fire, and
Rockefeller.
Rockefeller, and
Mm,
yeah. So we're seeing things happen, and I'm told by lots of people that it's the white hats, this group of people that are being guided by the Galactic Federation to infiltrate every single sector of society
mm.
and to remove these parasitic fat bloodline families. We saw the Queen go. Charles is neither here nor there. He seems to be a bit pointless. Some people say he's been replaced anyway.
Mm.
And they're either replacing these people or they're getting rid of them. And they're all being told that your time's up and you're either going to bow down and disappear into the sunset, or we're going to kill you.
Who's that?
Those are your
Who
two
who are the
options.
ones that are going to kill them though? Like who's the
The
higher
white
ups?
hats.
The white hats. So the white hats have taken control, do you think?
That's what I'm told. I've no idea who they are. I know somebody, a lady actually, she's an author called Elizabeth Hancock, that says that she speaks to somebody called Simon Parks,
Mm.
who is in contact with these people. And I have asked so many times now, who are they? Who's he talking to? Give me one name. He can't. He can't. And so there's a part of me that thinks this is
Mm. It could be a
this.
false savior program as well.
Exactly. That there's part of me that thinks that. But I do see they're running scared, and I think they're going to try and do as much as possible as quickly as possible now. I would imagine that within the next 12 months they might have another go at a pandemic.
I think
And
they
I
will.
think they'd probably target children this time rather than making us feel bad about our grandparents.
Well, it's funny you should say that, but that's something that I was told by someone in government actually.
Oh,
Yeah, they said that the next pandemic, what they're going to do is that the propaganda is going to be targeted on children dying. So then
mm-hmm.
instead of it being, oh, poor granny, it's going to be like, well, you're killing children. It's going to, they said that it's going to be a deliberate attempt to do that.
Yeah,
And so I actually created a Facebook post, so I've got it time stamped, so I can refer back to people, and I've even put in there, if that does happen, don't fall for it.
yeah.
And I've got that on my Facebook. So yeah, so that I was told that by someone in government. Yeah. You mentioned 1776 then. So
Mm.
why was that? So is that when that the negative, the Satan's little season started then? And
Yeah,
before that, what was it? We were living in a time of peace and tranquility with giants and different kind of mythological elements, a bit like Lord of the Rings kind of thing. That kind of,
yeah, very much
yeah.
like Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Yeah.
I yeah, so it wasn't sort of an overnight.
Right.
um
Mm.
it wasn't it didn't happen immediately. One day on the 3rd of July, everything we're all living in harmony and everybody's well, and then the following day everything changed. This was very gradual. This was the Jesuits had info, but before they were the Jesuits, they were the Phoenicians. They introduced banking, and
Mm.
I suppose they introduced greed and an obsession with power and control. And they became the Jesuits, and they slowly infiltrated every country in the world, and they took people out. They got rid of they got rid of people. They took over buildings and then altered the buildings and repurposed them. And this took a long time. This is a very gradual process. And at 1776, that's the beginning of them actually taking full control. And then from that point onwards, we start to see a lot more wars. We see civil wars, genocide, then the Napoleonic Wars, and they really start ramping things up. And slowly we edge into the First World War, which was ultimately paid for by the Rothschilds, spearheaded by Cecil Rhodes and a group of people called the Society of the Elect, and they had the ear of the royal family, and they were scared that Germany was going to become a superpower because they were still operating as a Tartarian country, and that they were operating using free energy. All of the architecture was still there, and they were far more advanced than anywhere else in the world because it was the last Bastille of Tartaria. So they had to get rid of that. Germany weren't complying. They were wiping the floor with everybody else in regard to technology and things that they'd implemented. Like if you had one child, you got 25% reduced from your mortgage. If you had two, it was 50%, three, it was 75%. They were really supporting their own people. There was no greed there. It was quite the opposite. And if you look at what they were doing in the Second World War, their technology was superior to everybody's. It's only because, Churchill and his friends committed acts of genocide that it brought them to their knees and cut off water and food supplies. And they didn't ever want to go to war. It was the British that started it. And for anybody who wants to look into that, just find out
Battle
what happened
Europa.
in Dresden. Pardon?
I was going to say Battle Europa is quite interesting as well.
Yes, that is. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I've not seen that for a while, but I'd recommend anybody watches that. But the Society of the Elect, with Cecil Rhodes at the helm and Rothschild's money behind it, is what caused the First World War. And the Second World War was the Germans trying to recover, trying to get things back on track. And the economy was being crushed again by the Rothschilds, crippling the economy in Germany. And the British decided they'd have another, with the Rothschilds paying the British government to do it. They decided they'd go back for more and give it another damn good kicking. The British Empire is responsible for the most horrific acts of genocide, rape and pillage that have ever existed. And of course, the empire's still alive and well in the square mile in the city of London. And the Roman Empire, of course, is the Vatican. So, these parasites and these bloodline families are still out there, still controlling everything. And Rothschild used to say, he didn't care who sat on the throne as long as he had control of the money. Because in the end, everybody answered to him, and I imagine they still do now. The royal family alone must be in horrific debt to the Rothschilds for financing wars from a long time ago.
Yeah.
So a very gradual series of events wiped out the previous civilization. And the reason they call this Satan's little season is because the period of time where we built cathedrals and worked with frequency and were harnessing energy through the ether was called the millennial reign of Christ. A period of time where, if you like, these angelic kind of beings or people created the most incredible architecture all at the same time, all across the world. And that was, ironically, Jesus, it was born in 3 BC, which it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So 3 BC, if you Google it, Jesus, they say, was probably born around 3 BC. And if he lived until 1776, and 800 years, in my opinion, and this is based on research done by someone called Anatoly Fomenko, a Russian scientist. If 800 years have been added to our timeline, then 1776 is 976 AD. Chuck 3 years on for 3 BC, and you're at 979. You're not a million miles away from 1,000-year reign, 1,000 years of us building in harmony with the planet. And if you look at there are old stories and early photographs of people like the Ethiopian royal family walking around with lions as pets. They weren't being subdued. everything changed. So I think we lived in peace. I think there were giants. I think there were people of all sorts of sizes, what we would call, like you referred to Lord of the Rings. I think we had people that were tiny and people that were very big. And we all lived together.
Gulliver's Travels is kind of giving it away, right?
Exactly like that. Yeah. Was it Lilliput?
Lilliput was the island of small people, wasn't it? And then
Yeah. And
another
the
one.
horses
Yeah,
that could talk. And,
yeah,
and I think we used telepathy a lot
yeah.
more than we spoke. There doesn't appear to have been currency. I think it was barter. I think we traded and bartered, and everybody had what they needed. And because they appear to us, I appreciate that we're telepathic to an extent. You can start thinking about someone right now, and out of the blue, you'll suddenly get a message or a call from them. We all have that. We know when someone's staring at us, even if we can't see them, we'll turn around and we can feel things. So we've got this very diluted version of it. So yeah, all of this seems to have been disrupted. So they've upset the frequency on the Earth, which everything should be 432 hertz, everything, and it isn't. And if you look at water, if you look at a molecule of water under a microscope, when it's subjected to 432 hertz, it makes the most incredible patterns, and they look very much like what you would call a star fort. When you play music at 440 hertz, which is what the industry standard is now and what the church bells were changed to, then it makes sort of jagged shapes. It's misaligned. There's nothing there. But you can also sing to it. If you sing and say nice things to water, it would change the structure.
Masaru Emoto did that with He put fear as well and different labels and love on different water, and it created different crystalline structures.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, just from the power of the label itself being stuck on the jar.
I've not seen that.
Yeah,
I think that's
Masaru
amazing.
Emoto is his name. It's really worth you checking out. But yeah,
I'm,
so did they? So you saying that they deliberately changed the frequency of everything in
yeah.
society? They can't affect nature though, can they? But
No,
no,
but they can certainly cause problems with it, and I think we're
yeah.
seeing that now with EMF, and I think that's been
Mm.
going on for a very long time. I think that we're now talking about 5G constantly, aren't we? What's 5G doing to us? And that here, I can't remember where it was, but somewhere in England over the last few years, some calves were born in it. They'd put a 5G mast in a field where someone was rearing cattle. It was a cattle
Mm.
farm, and all of the calves were born blind, every single one. And people still don't join the dots, but there's been tens of thousands of reports done into the EMF problem with 5G, the damage and harm that it's causing. But I think that's been going on for a long time. I think the whole frequency of the Earth has been altered. Churches, for example, were somewhere that you used to go to heal. You had pipe organs for your internal organs at 432 hertz. They would balance your internal organs. Raymond Rife is someone that spent a lot of time looking into that, and he made the Rife machine, which was curing cancer by changing frequency. So you were subjected to a specific frequency, and it was actually zapping cancer cells. So we know that frequency ultimately is everything. Everything is frequency and vibration. And I think Nikola Tesla perhaps spent the majority of his lifetime trying to perfect that. So by disrupting the Earth's grid, the frequency of everything changed. The church bells were 432, and during the Second World War, the bells were taken to the narrative states to be used to make ammunition in the war effort. But now they're finding them buried, and they were replaced with bells that operated on 440 hertz. And now people are digging up. They're finding hundreds of bells, in the middle of deserts, dumped in the sea. Because my argument was, if you had to use all of the church bells and melt them down to make ammunition for this in the Second World War, then to replace them at the end of the war, you'd have had to have gone round, picked up all the shells, found all the bullets as well, literally dug them out of everybody, melted them back down to make more bells. Otherwise, where did the material come from to replace them? So it was a blatant lie. It was an opportunity to, the wars are often an opportunity to do more than just wipe out a bit of the population or kill people from the previous civilization that aren't towing the line.
Mm.
It's also about removing certain architecture and certain elements of the infrastructure. I think the illegal invasion of Iraq is probably a good example of that, because you've got, I think his name was something like Fassbender, the person that's the BBC claimed had found the tomb of Gilgamesh. And within literally a few weeks of him saying that he was on site and he had found it, and he'd opened up the tomb and found Gilgamesh, this sort of 16-foot red-headed giant. They declared war on Iraq, and it was the first place they bombed.
Oh wow.
Yeah, Iraq, that was not about oil. That's a miss. That's a bit of misdirection there. It was about architecture. They had to get rid of his tomb, and they believe that. And I've actually spoken to someone who was very high up in the American military, who was working in one of these locations, and worked with a group of people that were guarding one of these sites. And he alleges they'd found a Stargate, or rather Saddam Hussein had found a Stargate.
Wow.
They'd uncovered one, and that was what was bombed next. They wiped that out.
Wow.
Yeah, so they've been destroying every single trace of who we used to be, what came before. We think we're technologically advanced because we can use a bit of AI or do our shopping on a mobile phone. That is nothing compared to what we were capable. This is all stuff that's worthless and pointless. We didn't need mobile phones before. We didn't need the television. We were able to travel for free using airships and vacuum trains, and there were tunnels that connected everywhere, all across the world. And the technology that they had then, Atlantean technology, is what we would consider today to be science fiction or alien. Well, yeah, it's alien to us because the parasites are still using this stuff, but we have no access to it, and we're told that it doesn't exist. But I think the work of people like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells are worth people looking into, because they hide this stuff in plain sight. They tell us because they fear karmic retribution by not telling us what's going on. They use fiction to inform, but in such a way that we'll dismiss it. And then they've covered their asses. So it's the poison apple scenario. If I give you an apple and I say to you, oh, I've put poison in it, and laugh, then you eat it and die. Well, you've committed suicide. I told you. Now, if I don't tell you there's poison in it and you die, then I killed you. So it doesn't matter how I tell you, as long as I tell you, I've covered my arse. But my hope is that these people haven't done quite enough. I've no idea what happens when we go, but I hope that they haven't done anywhere near enough. I hope that whoever they answer to, or whatever they answer to, says, no, you tricked these people.
Yeah.
You now pay the ultimate price.
So do we know where the pyramids came from then? Because you kind of alluded to it a little bit there. So it's sort of angelically or divinely created. Do you know anything more about that? Or do you still
Right.
think it was from the ether and people, it was still humans working with the ether to build it? Or was it actually a divine kind of intervention, kind of creation for things like the pyramids?
The pyramids are something that I associate with the Anunnaki, and I know that that's a loose term, and there aren't a race of beings called the Anunnaki. It's just what it's a term for people that came from the sky, or light beings or enlightened beings. Or so for me, the pyramids that are built all over the world, and I think the biggest pyramid is in Iran, but we know that they're covered. A lot of them are still covered in soil and grass, and they've been hidden. So they're all over the world. Now, to me, I believe that they were built by a far more advanced race of people. But let's, for ease, call them the Anunnaki. So they built these. They align with constellations, Sirius B, Orion's Belt, and so on. So I think that they communicated to the gods or their gods through them, but they were ultimately huge energy centers. And what we see poking out the ground is really the tip of the iceberg. They're huge structures that go
Oh,
way
so
down.
I've seen images of like they're like obelisks in a way underneath.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. They go
yeah,
down. Yeah,
yeah.
they really do go down a
Right.
very long way. So we're not really seeing much. But that's a different civilization in my mind. I think Tartaria. So I think you have the Anunnaki. I think there've been lots of civilizations here. I think the Anunnaki, if we follow the story of the Anunnaki, they take this uh, bipedal um, Neanderthal and tweak its DNA, and over a period of time perfect it, and then out we pop a Damu. And then we populate and we populate and we populate, and they clone more and more and more and more of us. And
Mm.
then they've got a race of people that can replace the Igigi, who were a slave race the Anunnaki brought here to mine for precious metals and minerals. So if we follow that story, they were here for some time, thousands and thousands of years. And then they go, I don't know where, maybe they went underground, maybe they went off back somewhere, but
Mm.
they go, and then we have this next period. And to me, that's Atlantis and the Atlanteans, when they're working using the same technology, but they're building in a different way, a slightly different civilization, slightly different race of people. They go, and then we have, a series of floods and deluges and apocalyptic events happen, and then we have this Tartarian period. So if the timeline's been falsified, like Anatoly Fomenko suggests, then we can go back to the year 1000 and say that that was the beginning of the millennial reign of Christ, when we worked we were spiritual, we worked in harmony and balance, and we created these most incredible structures and buildings. So I think that's a different civilization. And what's left of the Tartarians today, there are people out there that will be able to trace their family tree back hundreds of years. So they'll have Tartarian ancestry. And there'll be people who stumble when they go onto ancestry.com. They won't get very far. And I believe that they descend from clones, a repopulation program. And for people out there that think that you can't clone a human being, well, read Genesis and look at what they did to create Adam a partner. They pop one of his ribs out and make another person.
Yeah.
So you can either follow that route, or you
Mm.
can say you believe in the Anunnaki, in which case it's cloning, no matter how you look at it. Some people will argue that in Genesis it's a metaphor,
Mm.
just a metaphor. Well, whoever wrote that metaphor was describing how you'd clone someone. So it doesn't matter whether it's a metaphor or not. The knowledge of cloning is
Mm.
within Genesis. Or we could follow Darwin's theory of evolution, which was funded by the Vatican, to give an alternative theory that they had control of. The theory of evolution is absolute nonsense. It doesn't stack up, because you would then, you'd be able to go all the way back and say, well, for starters, what the bloody hell's going on with the panda? It can't reproduce very well, and it can't climb a tree. What can it do? It just eats bamboo. So evolution doesn't seem to work. And people will say, well, there are apes out there now that are mimicking fishing and spear fishing, mimicking humans. So they're starting to evolve. Nonsense. They've seen other people doing this and they're copying them. Then this isn't an evolution thing. If evolution existed, I wouldn't go outside and burn in the bloody sun. We know how important vitamin D is. Why would I burn? Why do to people, when they get to a certain age, why do our eyes start to fail? And this, glasses haven't been around that long. And why do our spines struggle? So I don't think we've evolved at all. I think you might adapt to meet your environment, and specific changes take place, but I don't believe in evolution.
Yeah, I don't believe in the theory of evolution. I think we do, like you said, we do adapt to our climate to a certain
Yeah, I
degree,
think we
but
adapt.
I think that probably is another bit of inverted history that they've fed to us
Mm.
to stop us for whatever realizing the true history, where we really came from, whether maybe there's a creator spirit, creator God, whatever you want to call it, but they're trying to take us away from that more and more and push us into the idea that we're just on a random rock in the middle of nowhere, just
Mm.
to make us feel infinitely insignificant, I guess. But if
Yeah, so I think that there are different beings have come here, and created different races of people,
Yeah.
ultimately to do the same thing, to be subservient.
To be subservient. Yeah. And what can we talk about the great, like the kind of the resets that have happened then?
Mm.
So where are we now in the history? So basically, you're saying that is it 1776 there was a reset?
Yeah, so that's what we would consider to be a great reset. So you could
Right.
say, the Younger Dryas, the deluge, the Great Flood, that there are significant resets that take place, and there are smaller ones as well, little resets. So that First World War would be a good example of a reset.
Mm.
What happened in 2020, 9/11. These are all small resets, things that change the course of history, but not dramatically.
Yeah.
But things certainly change, and from our experience, change for the worse. But great resets happen when a civilization needs to be wiped out, and that can be for a number of reasons. But they needed to get rid of people from the Tartarian period of time, also known as the millennial reign of Christ, because you had millions of people that were living with energy being harnessed from the ether. They were going into buildings to have their organs balanced and their chakras realigned. They were using telepathy. They had technology that we weren't aware of now. So how do you tell all of these people it's going to stop because we're about to introduce fossil fuels? You're going to start paying for your energy, and you're going to start needing pharmaceutical medicines. You're not going to go in one of these buildings and feel better anymore. You're going to go in there and pray and follow some rules.
Mm.
And you're going to pay us as well when you go in there. We're going to hand out a tray. You're going to pay. You're going to do what you're told while we slowly introduce laws across the world. So you need to get rid of the bulk of the people. So civil wars take place. And what you do is you turn two people against each other. And a good way of doing that is to create a divide. And perhaps a good example would be North and South Korea. Put a wall somewhere, divide people, get them to hate each other and let them have a war. And then you can sit back and watch them kill each other and problem solved. The people that remain are either going to toe the line and get on with how things are going to be from now on, or you're going to commit them, or you're going to incarcerate them. Those are your options. And if you've got a large group of people that you can't do anything with, then cut off their fuel supply or introduce a disease into the area, contaminate the water, do whatever you need to do, have an outbreak, call it the plague, call it cholera, whatever you want to call it. So they'll cull. Not only does that solve a problem, you've just got rid of a large number of people that are going to be an issue, that aren't going to conform. But at the same time, you get to sit back and enjoy watching it. These are low vibrational, vile. People is the wrong word, vile beings, these bloodline families. They get incredible pleasure from watching us suffer. And that's where the fun comes from. So to incarcerate us, if you think about the process, it's all about harnessing our energy. They want to take this energy that we have and take it away from us. So they'll charge us and then they'll place us in a cell.
Yeah,
That's a
going
back.
well, it's
Yeah,
going back to the circuit board you mentioned earlier, right?
yeah. And then
It's all
think of
connected.
money. Think
Yeah.
of birth
Banks.
canal, banks,
Yeah.
cash flow. Yeah, it's
Charged, discharged,
yeah.
currency, current, yeah. So
Yeah,
um
everything's to
mm,
do with money and control and the flow of things, and that's the Phoenicians that introduced that are now the Jesuits, which is the Roman Empire, and the cabal, the
mm,
parasites, the elite, whatever you want to call them. It's the same people we're talking about,
mm,
and it's just elements of control that cause ultimately suffering, pain, and
right.
suffering and hardship.
So was there like a great reset in 1776? Was it a flood then? And was it what we some people have called the mud floods? Was that what it was?
Yeah, a series of events, and that was to
Right.
do with upsetting the geomagnetic grid, Earth's grid, by upsetting that. And I think that they use direct energy weapons.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I think. They may well have actually caused explosions in places like star forts where ley lines meet, and that
Mm,
there are centers of the most incredible power and energy. And there are 319 of them still left. So if you wanted to upset the frequency of a star thought, then you could probably disrupt an entire ley line, cause a quake, cause a plate shift, a tsunami. Yeah,
Really? What,
so
that could take out the entire planet, do you think?
yes, ultimately, yes, you
Really?
could do that. Yeah, definitely,
Oh, wow.
definitely.
So,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
they say, so yeah, so that's what you think happened then. There was some kind of attack on the electromagnetic Earth's grid
mm,
on one of these nodes, like where the ley lines intersect,
mm,
right? And so that was enough impact to kind of maybe what create a huge flood then, and then that just or whatever, like
yeah.
all a destructive weather, sort of whatever it was, an earthquake, or whatever, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
absolutely. And
Okay.
and weather modification has been going on a very long time. I mean, Nikola
Mm.
Tesla was playing around with it. And now it's come out in the news that they're going to try and protect us from the sun's harmful rays. But of course, we know that that's not what they're doing. But it's like someone we were talking to earlier on today reminded us that the Americans were playing around with the weather in the Vietnam conflict,
Mm.
making it rain constantly, and that was well publicized. So I think weather modification. It's worth looking into what happened with the quake of New Madrid. Now that there was a quake that happened there out of the blue, and the magnitude of it was so vast and so intense that the Mississippi changed direction 180
Oh, wow.
degrees.
Mm.
Metallic objects were flying through the air and sticking to each other. Domesticated pets went absolutely savage and were attacking their owners, and wild animals were trying to get into people's houses for shelter because they were frightened.
Oh, wow.
And that's just New Madrid. So that's worth anybody. I wrote about it in my first book.
Mm.
That's worth people looking into exactly what happened. And then you're looking at the tops of mountains where where the ice was melting. You had melt water coming down at incredible speed, picking up mud, soil, rock, and debris along the way. And you'll find wherever you live, if you go onto the internet, you'll find that you either had a flood or a significant fire happen a couple of 100 years ago. So anybody watching this, doesn't matter where they live, there would have been a fire or a flood a couple of 100 years ago. And it's everywhere in the world.
Gosh, so that was about 200 years ago then. And then how many did that wipe out? Some people must have survived, no?
Oh yeah, people survived, but that was more about the buildings.
Oh, the
What they were
buildings
trying to
were,
do
oh,
was
right, they wiped
bury,
out the buildings. But
yeah,
didn't
bury a
you?
few, and yeah,
So that all the sacred buildings that were like free energy and like tapping into the ether and
yeah,
all that kind of stuff. And then they kind of said it was Tesla that created all that, but it's probably that was a cover story to say that actually it probably did come from all those ancient buildings that had that ancient wisdom, right?
yeah. I think he was reverse engineering. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
he says that he was in communication with the Venetians, but I think he was reverse engineering. That's of course if he existed, because it's
mm,
it's very difficult to know with
mm,
certain figures throughout time whether or not they, because obviously ultimately Tesla, the surname is Steele.
mm,
Um, it's difficult to know if these people existed, because with Tesla, there are an awful lot of patents in a very short period of time, no descendants, no video footage of a man who was a pioneer of technology and apparently was paid to talk
mm.
at events, and write articles and give presentations. His own museum, you have no video footage of him, nothing exists, but it does of Edison and Einstein. So you've got no living descendants, no trace apart from his old suit and Bible in his museum um, out in Croatia or Serbia. Or Bosnia, I can't remember which one it's in. But a few years back, I contacted them and said, "Are you aware of any living descendants?" No. Do you have any video footage of him? No. Why is that? We think he might have been camera shy.
Oh, is that right? Because I've been to the Tesla museum in Serbia, in
It's
Belgrade.
Serbia, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry,
No,
yeah.
I think he was born in Croatia, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that, but he's Serbian.
Yeah.
But yes, and I went to the museum, and I'm not sure if I did see any actual footage of him or anything. Yeah, you're right.
No, they haven't got anything. And
No.
someone approached me and said that he was their great uncle. And I said, "Oh, wow, that's incredible." And so I
Mm,
started pushing, and I
mm,
said, "Well, tell me more." Now, so I
mm,
asked them a few questions about his brother that
mhm.
died, fell off a horse, and a few days later died. Then I asked about his mother, and do you think that that's where the inventing came from? And what was your favorite invention that Nicola's mother created.
Mm.
Immediately, she came back and said, Donald Trump has told me I'm not allowed to talk to you.
Oh my God, really?
And I thought, you're barking mad, aren't you? You're absolutely insane. I
Mm.
mean, you don't tell somebody you're the great niece of Nikola Tesla and a
Mm.
simple question is fired at you, and you immediately, because you're not telling me the truth and you've made it
Mm.
up,
Mm.
you immediately come out with something like that. Why would Donald Trump say you're not allowed to tell? She didn't even live in America.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and I thought, okay, so and of course, people out there have said to me on numerous occasions, of course he existed. I've seen a photo of him.
Oh yeah.
Of course he's. I think Jesus Christ. Don't say, of course he existed, unless you met him,
Mm.
because we just don't know.
Yeah, yeah, it's a bit questionable, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd love him to have existed,
Mm.
because if he
Mm.
did, then he's an incredible person. But I just have this doubt because people are now questioning Shakespeare, and a lot of people suggest that there was a committee that wrote those books.
Mm.
J.K. Rowling, I think most people know she didn't write anything at all. Leonardo da Vinci wasn't one person; it was an actual group of people, a
Mm.
family that were doing all of this.
Makes
And
sense.
Napoleon Bonaparte, most people say never existed. If you look at
Really?
his
Wow.
backstory, at 25 years old, he's not only the most powerful man in Europe, but he's also in his spare time writing romantic novels. No living descendants.
Mm. Really?
It's the
Never
same
existed?
old story. I
Wow.
mean, if you think
Mm.
about it, if his great, 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 great grandchild was around today, we'd probably know who he was.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny that I've often thought Banksy's not a one person, just a consortium of artists that work
Yeah,
with the
a
local
group of
council.
people from Bristol. Yeah,
I just think that I
yeah.
just think they're working with local councils. They're just a consortium of artists that have permission to do the graffiti and stuff.
Well, what is interesting with Banksy is whenever the Gorillas play, a
Yeah.
Banksy piece will appear in the same area at the
Oh,
same
right. Okay.
time. So
Yeah.
there's some connection to the group that Damon Albarn and the Gorillas.
Mm.
There's some connection to Banksy and that
Yeah.
band.
Yeah. Can we just quickly talk about, so you said 1800s there was a great flood to wipe out most of the architecture, but then you said a lot of the people were still alive, but then you said there was a cloning, like a kind of
Mm.
s- had how many people were cloned, and like how many people did they then make up of the population, do you think?
Right, here's some weird facts for you.
Hmm.
Now, these are facts according to the internet, so
Right.
of course,
Yeah, take
open for
it. Yeah,
debate, isn't it?
exactly. Yeah.
So, world population in 1776
Hmm.
is about 770 million people.
Hmm.
World population in 1876 is 1.35 billion. So it's sort of doubled, give or take,
Mm.
there or thereabouts. It's about double.
Hmm.
World death population during the same period of time, 3.3 billion. Yeah, you see the problem.
Mm.
So almost 3 times the amount of people died during that period of time than the population had. So something isn't quite right.
Mm.
Also, for the population, so let's just take the people let's remove the death toll, which was, natural causes, genocide, war, disease.
Mm.
Just remove them, forget about them for a moment. If we just say the population doubled over 100 years, at the same period of time, we saw all of these civil wars, then the Napoleonic Wars, and so on. So a lot of men, and I'm not being sexist, but it was men that typically went to
Mm.
war,
Mm.
were killed.
Mm.
And those that weren't killed were still away for a very long time. So the narrative is that a lot of them would have had tried to have a baby before they went off to war.
Mm.
They were away for years. Most didn't come back. So what we're saying is that literally every man that went off to battle got his wife pregnant before he did. But then if you do the maths, that doesn't double the population anyway.
Mm.
So none of that stacks up. So to replace the population, they needed to do something. And then all of a sudden, the sort of late 1800s, we see a movement called the Orphan Trains, and children from New York, where they claim that the kids living on the street, these orphans, were it was out of control. There were too many children. They didn't know what to do. So they start shipping them across Midwest America to go and work in mines and go and work on farms. The numbers, again, don't stack up. There's thousands. Now, conservative figures say about 250,000 children over a period of relatively short period of time are shifted from New York to Midwest America, 250,000. But people suggest that actually you could double that. If the narrative is 250, then it's probably 500,000. So 500,000 children, where did they come from? Where are their parents? 500,000 kids. That's just New York. So they came from somewhere. And the really weird thing is, at the same time, you've got someone called Dr. Martin Cooney introducing the incubator for the first time, based upon something a French physicist designed and doctor who specialized in fertility in Paris. He invented an incubator based upon what he'd seen being used in a poultry farm for chickens for hatching eggs, and decided for premature babies they were going to put these premature babies in an adapted incubator for chicks. So you've got an epidemic of orphan children, not just in New York, but this was also in England and Russia and lots of places throughout Europe. So you've got a problem with there being too many children and not enough parents. And at the same time, you've got incredible steps being taken to save the lives of premature babies that would have died without the intervention. So they've got too many kids, and now they're trying to help those that wouldn't have naturally survived anyway. Well, that kind of doesn't make any sense. That's a bit of a paradox. So all of these children came from somewhere. Now, a lot of them would have been seized from their parents because the dad dies at war. And under the Lunacy Act that had just been introduced, if your husband's killed in battle, that was just cause for you to be committed to an asylum. Reading too much, even having a period, was part of the Lunacy Act. Women's problems was a reason to be sectioned indefinitely. Reading too much, falling off a horse. If you fell off a horse, you were considered insane. So they found any reason at all to commit women, because the children then become custody of the state, and then they were shipped and moved about. But when you look at the numbers again, it still doesn't stack up. So they repopulated the world. I believe they repopulated the world by cloning. So they've got this technology that was used perhaps to create us by the Anunnaki in the very first place, or whatever technology that they're referring to in Genesis that was used to give Adam a partner, Lilith, Eve, whichever way you want to go with that. This then saw a huge surge of babies, and at exactly the same time that happens, a film comes out in France directed by someone called Alice Guy, and it's called The Cabbage Fairy, and it depicts this fairy in a row of cabbages, and she plucks babies out of the cabbages and sells them to a middle class couple. Then you see a series of postcards come out called the Cabbage Patch postcards, showing babies growing in cabbages. Then repopulation postcards come out, and it all happens around the same sort of time. The films, the postcards, the orphan trains, and children being sold and posted, actually sent by mail.
Oh my God.
Babies, and people will be able to find this if they go online. Babies for sale, babies being posted and shipped from one place to another as a commodity. And if you look at the Industrial Revolution, you'll see that miners are children, hence the term miners.
Yeah.
They were mining, children working the machines, the Jenny. If you look at anything to do with any imagery to do with the Industrial Revolution, it's just children. Where are the adults? So the great thing with a kid is you can give it a new name, you can give it some new history, and tell it how things are, with no understanding of what happened before, because they've got no parents. So they're either an orphan or a clone. And either way, you can just give it a new historical narrative. It doesn't know any different. So that's what I believe happened. I believe they reset cloning. Now, I can't say hand on heart that absolutely happened, but when you start looking at the figures, and the sudden boom in population at a time when, you know, a lot of men had died. It doesn't really stack up, and you can't over a period of 100 years double the population. I think the population figures today that we're given are out. China, Russia and Japan recently did research on the Chinese population figures,
Mm.
and they say that they've exaggerated them by 3 times.
Mm.
So I think it's all a lie anyway. But to double the population in 100 years is impossible. And then you look at throw the death toll in of 3.3 billion people during that same period of time. It's all out of whack.
Yeah.
So the only thing that makes sense to me is that they mass produced us to repopulate, get the infrastructure up and running. These kids know nothing. And the interesting thing is that Alice Guy, this lady, this first female pioneer in movie directing and acting, said that she was inspired to make the movie about children growing from cabbage patches and being sold as a commodity by going to the World's Fairs and seeing Dr. Martin Cooney exhibiting incubator babies. The marketing ploy for the incubator babies was, we can grow a child in a matter of days. And that was how they were marketing it, that they could speed up the process of a premature baby. Let's say it's 3 months premature. They could speed up that 3 months into just a few days of growth, full growth within just a few days. And that was how they were marketed. And then they were sold. But the interesting thing is, the film came out before Martin Cooney started exhibiting the incubators.
Right.
So if she got inspiration by visiting the World's Fairs and seeing Martin Cooney showing these incubator babies, she would have needed a time machine to do that, because she'd have had to have gone into the future to see it happen and then come back again and made her first film. Then her second film is Midwife to the Upper Classes, and they are throwing babies around there by their limbs, picking them up and throwing them on the floor. These babies are in distress. You can watch it on YouTube. They hadn't handled a child before. And my guess is because they hadn't seen one.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
So
Look at old photos. There are no children. You know, if you look at the first early photos of World's Fairs in particular, you won't see any kids in them. There's no children anywhere.
So what are you saying then, that because that was there was a reset, and then what, the adults emerged straight away in adult form, kind of thing?
No, what I'm saying is that I don't think we populated in the same way we used to. I think people lived a lot longer. And I think that's to do with how we lived.
Right.
I think that's to do with the oxygen levels. I think that's to do with the fact that we didn't appear to get ill. I think we lived in better. We weren't constantly being poisoned. So I think our lifespan, I think, was a lot longer. My wife's got an old book written by a doctor on old medical book. And he's talking about a couple of patients, and they're all up in Scotland, actually, apart from one, I think, was in the northeast of England. I can't for the life of me remember what the name of this book is, but if you're interested, I'll ask her. And one of them was 184, one's 176, and this wasn't unusual. So
But
I think the previous civilization lived longer, so there weren't as many children around. We didn't need to reproduce to keep our family going. I think we lived a lot longer.
But they would have still had children, though.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there appears to be a mass of people out there that were perhaps more easily manipulated and would toe the line, and hadn't experienced children to the extent we have. Whereas everybody, and most members of your family at some point. I mean, for me, a brother had 2 kids. Most of my friends have kids. I don't think it was like that. I don't think we populated in the same way as we used to. I don't mean we did it in a different way. I don't think we needed to do it. So if you think about it, if you had a farm going back years ago, you'd probably have a large family because you'd hand the farm down. The children would work on the farm and then they would hand it down. Well, if you lived for a couple of 100 years, You don't have the same urgency, and there isn't the same requirement
Mhm.
to repopulate, to keep you going and keep that farm going, keep it within the family. You don't have the same urgency. So I don't think there were as many children around. There weren't as many babies around. And the reason that they had this mass injection of children was really to fire up the Industrial Revolution
Mm.
and basically start a new civilization. But you've got to watch these films.
Yeah.
If anybody watches the Alice Guy films, you'll see people that don't appear to have handled a baby before. And
Mm.
if they look at photos of the World's Fairs and early Victorian photos of people looking out of place on beaches wearing full dress, top hats and so on, they don't look like they've even been on a beach before. There are no children anywhere.
Mm.
And I do think that that's to do with lifespan. I don't think we needed to repopulate to the extent we do
What?
now.
So the people you see in those times in those photos, you think they could be like over 100 years old?
Yeah, I think so.
Really?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so. Yeah, yeah, I do.
Why were they not taller than like giants?
Well, I think the Giants were that they would have got rid of the Giants a lot sooner than that
Mm.
because that's but there's
Mm.
also, if anybody's ever watched it, there are a couple
Mm.
of books written about the navigator that lived beyond the ice walls,
Mm.
and that turned into an animated movie that came out on YouTube a little while ago. They say that the Giants fought alongside us in the early wars, the very early wars, civil wars that took place, but they took such a battering. They were the first to be targeted, that
Mm.
they retreated. They lost so many, hence all of these, you know,
Mm.
remains that the Smithsonian's are very quick
Mm.
to take. And so in America in particular, they say that a lot of giants fought alongside us, but they took too many um, losses and retreated and went underground. They went back to where they were from. And some people claim that we spent a lot of time living underground too, that
Mm.
we weren't always above the surface. We spent a lot of time underground,
Yeah.
and there were cities underground that we dwelled in. But yeah, my theory is that, and this is based from information that I've been
Mm.
absorbing,
Mm.
that we didn't repopulate like we do today, and that was to do with life
Life
expectancy.
expectancy. So
Yeah,
those people, let's say those clones, are they able to reproduce though?
yeah. I
They
mean, Dolly the
can.
sheep did. She had offspring.
Oh, she did. Okay, so
Yeah,
it could be that there's a huge percentage of the population that came from those clones then.
yeah, and I think that's what you referred to as an NPC earlier.
Right, okay, yeah. And I think I've watched in your interview with Carly, you said that's why there's certain people that have almost like a primordial ancestral connection to truth and real history and the
Hmm.
kind of divine spark because they've got that complete lineage, that goes way back. But then
Yeah.
there's others that are just a sort of a little bit like blinkered and just whatever's thrown at them, they'll just accept. And there's no real
Hmm.
knowingness, I guess, like in their bones, in their soul. Like, and you saw that in 2020 when you're like,
Yeah.
some of us are like, what? It's so obvious. Like, what's wrong with you? And then they're like,
Yes.
what do you mean? Why do you take it, go back to normal? You're like,
Yeah.
are you up? Are you bonkers? Like, can you not see it?
Yeah.
Like we're talking friends, family, like most, I would say most
Hmm.
people were like that. But then there was like a small percentage, and that small percentage of us were like, are you like it's almost like the emperor with no clothes. It's that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
No,
Yes. That's a good analogy.
and it's just like so obvious. But then it's like you're seeing lemmings falling off a cliff, and if you say anything, you're considered mad. It was a very
Hmm.
disorientating time, but it did show us that the two different kind of types of people. So are you saying that maybe those NPCs who could be our friends and family, maybe they did come from clones? And does that not, if our family members are that, does that not make us clones like from the clone genetics as well?
I think that there are well, first of all, we carry memory within our DNA.
Mm.
Memory is held in water. We carry memory in our DNA. So I believe that the reason some of us are awake and some of us aren't
Mm.
is simply because within our DNA we have the memory of ancestors, and we know that something isn't
Mm.
right, that we're not supposed to live like this, that things have been changed and it doesn't sit right with us. We can't quite put our finger on it. But we will also, the people that are wide awake will also be the same people that stared out the window at school. what we were being taught seemed pointless.
Mm.
Nothing really made any sense. You weren't allowed to question
Mm.
anything, and if you disagreed, you got sent out of the room. So it didn't work. The people that got on really well at school, or didn't get on really well at school, but did what they were told, were more obedient. And I think it's to do with the obey gene, this gene that they claim the Anunnaki tweaked. So we've got this memory in us that we're carrying, and we know when something isn't right. But there are things that can be things that have been introduced into society, into the system, that can
Mm.
affect and disrupt that. So that could be mental health.
Mhm.
It could be battling with a disease.
Yeah.
It could be financial pressure. It could be starting a new job, losing a job, breaking the law and knowing you're going to prison, losing a loved one, or severe impact to your pineal gland, which we know, as you spoke about earlier on,
Mm.
children have this most incredible imagination. They see fairies at the bottom of the garden and monsters under the bed. And I think that that's your pineal gland being able to see things in a slightly different frequency,
Mm.
because we know the human eye sees very little of what's actually around us. And if you get a camera and put it on night vision, you'll see a lot more going on and things bopping around and orbs and so on all the time. So I think the impact to your pineal gland will also have a significant effect, and
Mm.
also your state of mind. So I think our diet, you know, medication that we could be on. So, for example, my brother is awake, but
Mm.
nowhere near to the extent that I am.
Mm.
But my brother has battled with all sorts of problems over the year. He's had, a couple of really severe health scares, and during the pandemic, he was misdiagnosed. He was told he may have bowel cancer, and got divorced and had a really messy divorce at the same time. So I'm wide awake in 2020 thinking, what the bloody hell's going on here? This doesn't sound right. He's doing whatever anybody throws at him because he's got other things that are of too much concern. So I think the situation, your own situation and what you're currently going through, these things are, a lot of things are put out there to distract us,
Yeah, definitely. But
and that can misguide
and
us.
that can misguide a lot of people. But do you think in terms of the clones, so there's what I'm saying is there's a kind of a long-standing species of human, and then there's like the clones, and then we kind of mix together. But how would we know that we were
Mm.
clones or not? I'm guessing, I'm asking, or you know,
I don't think we can know that for sure. But
yeah.
one thing I would say is doing your family tree, and not relying on
Oh
ancestry.com,
God,
but
yeah. Mm.
yeah, because there's something really.
Don't trust that. I do not trust
No,
that.
and you're right not to, especially when you consider who owns them. It's
Mm.
Blackstone, who were originally part of BlackRock.
Mm.
Blackstone, who are into bio weapons. So if you wanted to find out, what sector of society are a certain, have certain DNA, then, and you want to get rid of them, owning something like ancestry.com and getting people to
Mm.
send their DNA in would be a very good way of doing that. Of course, they were taking swabs during the pandemic. I think they're building a huge database so they can hit us with something and target specific groups. That's ultimately what I think they're doing. But
Mm.
the second book, The Rise of the Clone, that goes into that in a lot more detail, and it contains information that I wouldn't want to say
Mm.
here because I don't want to cause a problem on the platform for you.
That's
So
fine.
but yeah,
Thank you
thanks
for
for
the
the heads
chat.
up on that.
Yeah, and thank you for the chat. It's been amazing. Like I didn't even notice the time, but we've been talking nearly 2 hours, so
Bloody hell.
so good. I mean, it's so like there's so many. Yeah, we could have gone in so many different directions with that as well. So much information, isn't there? So many different topics we covered.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much more as well. I'd love to maybe get you back on. We can talk a bit more about cloning and
Yeah, sure.
stuff
Yeah, I
like
can
that.
go in depth into that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that that my gut is that
Mm, mm.
I'm told quite a lot that clones can't reproduce, but actually, right now, the most successful horse at stud is a clone.
The most successful racing horse.
Yeah, racehorse
Oh,
that's
okay.
actually at stud. I mean,
Mm.
they're breeding from him.
Oh, right.
He was
Okay.
a clone. The president
Mm,
of Argentina, he's got 3 bull mastiffs. They're all cloned.
mm.
Dolly the sheep had 3 lambs. I was going to say children there,
Right.
three
Okay.
offspring, and she actually had 2 sisters as well.
Mm,
So it's just not true. And people will say, "Well, you can clone a sheep, but you can't clone a human." Why?
mm.
Read the Bible, read
Yes. Well, there's
Genesis.
Clonade as well. Have you heard of Clonade?
Oh, yes, that's a chapter.
You
Yeah,
know,
I've dug
people
on that.
people there's a guy called Kid Boo. He says he's a second generation clone made through
Yeah.
Clonade. And then they're dropping hints as well. There's a Netflix series called Living with Yourself,
Mm,
where the guy like finds an he basically having a shit life, so he clones himself,
mm.
and then it's basically like him having competition with his clone for his girlfriend, that kind of stuff. And then you've got movies like Multiplicity from the
Yeah,
90s,
yeah.
kind of
They cloned Tyrone, and
yeah,
there's yeah. Well, I
yeah.
did a chapter on Clonade actually, right?
Mm.
And
All right.
Brittany Houston, crikey,
There's
Britney
a
Spears. There's a clone
yeah,
there for.
yeah,
There's a
that's a clone.
hybrid.
That's a hybrid, isn't it?
I mean,
Yeah.
she one of
Uh,
her films, one of her, sorry, one of her songs was about being cloned. I'm a clone, or
oh right.
who's the original. And the video that supported it was her smashing up a cloning center. And within a few days of that being released is when she lost custody of her kids, shaved her hair off, and went a bit mad.
Oh
So
right.
some of them, and this is all to do with selling your soul to the devil.
Mm.
It's giving the Illuminati the permission to clone you.
Mm. Yeah, and there
And
was
then
another
what
one.
happens to,
Cardi B or something said a tweet
yeah, Cardi B.
about being cloned or something. Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin Hart's spoken about it.
Mm.
Conor McGregor.
Really? He
Yeah,
spoke about it.
yeah. There's an interview with him. There's where he's it's for the movie Roadhouse that he did, and if anyone watches the video, I think it
Mm.
was on ESPN.
Mm.
They'll find it on Google if they type in Roadhouse Conor McGregor
Mm.
interview with his co-actor, the main star. I can't remember his name. Just check him out. He's malfunctioning all over the place. And then the latest Bad Boys film, if they look at Martin Lawrence with Will
Mm.
Smith is clearly the handler of Martin Lawrence. Martin Lawrence can hardly even talk. He's adolescent.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, he can't talk. He doesn't know what's going on.
Well,
That's
Joe Biden, I think, is a series of clones. I think Joe
yeah,
Biden has multiple clones.
yeah,
A different, maybe some is like experimental cyborg technology, others is like AI generated, and I think some are
yeah.
actors with face masks as well. I think.
Yes, yeah, the full bodysuit. Gucci Mane's an example of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Gucci Mane is, yeah. But again, I don't know.
This is fine. Yeah, no, it's all good.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
all
want to
good.
spoil too much because they are literally chapters in my book where
Okay.
actually
Well, let's
I have gone very deep
mention your
down that
books
hole.
then, and then let's give that a plug, and I'll also mention your books in the
Yeah,
description. Do
I'll,
you want to just give that a plug, and
yeah, sure.
yeah,
Yeah, so I've written two.
yeah,
My first one is Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids. So that basically is a deep dive into the Warren, starting off with the falsification of history, the Tartarian Empire, who they were, what they did, who wiped them out, and then how they brought their technology back and repopulated. And after I wrote that, and through my Facebook group, I put a poll out there and said, out of all of the chapters, which was your favorite? And they all said the same thing. It's the Cabbage Patch Babies. That really fascinates us. Having the doll come into the market in the 80s, it's a little bit like rubbing our face in the dirt. So that's the second book, Rise of the Clones,
oh wow,
because everybody said it was the Cabbage Patch Babies that was the most interesting element of it. And this is
mm,
the chapters in here. What we mentioned earlier on, actually. I mean, it
mm,
starts off talking about the origin of species, baby farms, incubator babies, Dolly the sheep, inbreeding, celebrity cloning, Disney, Clonaid, Ancestry.com. And it's also got stories from people that have contributed about problems they found when they sent their DNA in and things that they've uncovered.
oof.
And a couple from people whose parents were on the orphan trains, and one person who's been trafficked.
Oh gosh,
Yeah, yeah, and what their story. So it's all to do with blood groups, bloodlines, and the displacement and movement of children. And half a dozen people submitted stories to me that were just horrific,
mm.
and I wanted to share them. They wanted me to share them.
So this is recent then. This would have happened like a few years ago, like what when they were children in.
Yeah, yeah. So some of them are talking about their grandparents or their parents, and one
Right.
person in particular is talking about what happened to them,
Mm,
and their story is just absolutely bizarre,
mm,
to the point where in their mid-50s they're not allowed a driving license. They don't exist. The police come around the house every day.
Really?
Yeah, so we're watching you, and yeah, they tried to find out why they were, what happened to them,
Mm.
why they live in Canada when they're from South America, where's their birth mother,
Mm.
and they tried to get some help. Then went to a solicitor, and now they're regularly arrested, banned from driving, banned from working. They're not allowed to do anything. They did step foot outside the house, they're arrested for something on
Gosh.
suspicion of anything. Yeah, their life has been absolutely horrific, and they wanted to share it. So
Mm.
there are people in there that were orphans, people in there whose parents were orphans, people who have found some bizarre things through ancestry.com as well. So it's a chapter dedicated to people that have lived
Mm.
through what I'm writing about.
Brilliant.
Mm.
Guy, thank you so much, my man.
Thank you.